Hey gang, I have got a special video for you today because a few days ago I got something in the mail that makes me very excited. Check it out. Littlest Lovecraft presents the Dunwich Horror. Oh man, if you guys have been with the channel for a while, you might remember that about this time last year I got Littlest Lovecraft presents The Call of Cthulhu. Now these are both Kickstarters by the wonderful sisters Tro Rex and Iona Bella. I don't remember how I first came across the Call of Cthulhu Kickstarter, but basically they took some of the wonderful H.P. Lovecraft stories that I love so dearly and that I have named my YouTube persona after, Cthulhu 2. They have taken these horror stories of dread and despair and monstrous creatures, and they have put them in basically a children's book format, as you could probably guess by Littlest Lovecraft, and they have such cool illustrations. They have a really neat art style, and they put everything to prose, and it's really cool. So I had so much fun getting my first Kickstarter last year, and this year's project was the Dunwich Horror, which is actually a story that I hadn't read by Lovecraft until somewhat recently. I don't know why, because it's one of his better known ones. But I wanted to show it off to you guys, both the cool art style and some of the things that I got along with the book because of the Kickstarter. And then I want to do a reading of the book as well. I talked to Tro about that, and she was totally gung-ho for it. So thank you very much, Tro, if you are watching, and Iona too. So I'm going to do a reading for you guys, and then I also have a special surprise for you in this video as well, so stay tuned for that. So let me show you a few of the goodies that I got along with the Kickstarter. I didn't get everything. There were a couple other add-ons that I didn't get this time around, but still got some pretty cool stuff. So they've got a little Ex Libris sticker that you can put in your book, from the library of, or something along those lines in the Latin. That's what fancy people put on their books. A number of neat little postcards too. Science! Can you see that? Science! Something about cows should go here. The more you know. Sweet dreams. And I think my favorite is because of the look of it. Visit Scenic Dunwich. How cool is that? So a lot of these scenes won't make sense if you're not familiar with the story of the Dunwich Horror, but if you watch this video, then you will become familiar with it. One really cool thing is because of the level I supported at, it looks like it got a little dirty since I got it, I got an art print of one of the drawings, the illustrations, and it's a lot like the actual cover of the book, but very nicely done, oh, it's so beautiful, look at that. I love their art style. So those are the goodies. Last year, along with Call of Cthulhu, I also got a little coin with like Cthulhu on it and some dice with some tentacles on it and stuff. Just it's kind of some fun, goofy add-ons. This year, I went for some different add-ons instead. One thing I want to mention, I made it into the thank you section because of the support level I was at. Right there, check that out. Yours truly, Cthulhu 2. Oh yeah. Very nice. I got a big grin on my face when I saw that. And this is something I had forgotten about after I chose my backing level. It's an autographed copy. How cool is that? Tro and Io right there. So yeah, that is the book. It is beautiful. Instead of like recording me reading the book and flipping the pages, it doesn't come through very well. So thankfully, they also send out an ebook version. So I'll be able to show you the illustrations via the ebook, so it'll be a lot sharper and clearer and just better all around. So that is what the book looks like from the outside. Now let's transition to what the book reads like. I think you guys are going to enjoy it. If you are unfamiliar with the Dunwich Horror, this will be a really nice, easy to digest kind of condensing of the story, I guess. And then if you want to read the story in its entirety, I will have a link in the description to somewhere you can do that online. So yeah, stay tuned. We will read the book, and then I'll tell you about my little surprise for you guys afterwards. Littlest Lovecraft presents The Dunwich Horror by Tro Rex and Iona Bella. In north-central Mass is a lost, lonely place. The grass grew too wild and the trees seemed too tall. Circles of stones crowned most all the hills. whilst the houses found there were all squalid and small. Though the hills had an uncommon beauty to them, there pervaded a sense of great dread and unease. Some of the summits were even and round, and older by far than those tall stands of trees. Tucked away in the hills and well hidden from time, the village of Dunwich sat rotting away. The old stands of trees and the overgrown weeds do little to hide the deep state of decay. Just outside of Dunwich sat Whately's old home, and Lavinia lived with her mad father there. The Whateleys were not much well liked by the town. They practiced black magic, the rumors declared. On Candlemas night she gave birth to her son, but the neighbors heard not of his birth for a week. It was not till old Whately first spoke of the child. He was proud of his grandson, so strange and unique.
"If Lavinia's boy looked at all like his pa, he wouldn't look much like as what you'd expect. Some day you'll hear the boy call out his name from the top of old Sentinel Hill, I suspect."
For the first several months no one saw the new babe, but the townsfolk were all a most curious lot. They snuck up to see, but they found only cows, that were strangely anemic and sickly, they thought. By the springtime, most townfolk had seen the young boy. His appearance was always a bit of a shock. They said not a word of his strange rapid growth, but in months he was already starting to walk. One autumn eve, Silas saw through the trees strange Lavinia and Wilbur by dim lantern's light. Soon after, a fire blazed on Sentinel Hill, and it lit up the sky on that Halloween night. Early next year, the town gossips took note. Young Wilbur had grown and was starting to speak. His appearance was odd and mature for his age, and more was abnormal than just his physique. The boy was disliked even more than his kin, and no dog alive could stand having him near. Folks whispered of rites and the name Yog-Sothoth, and rumors of magic were spoken with fear. Old Whately continued to buy up more cows, but his herd never grew any larger in size. He began to repair the top floor of his home and boarded the windows from folks' prying eyes. When construction was finished at last on the house, the neighbors knew not what was hidden inside. The shed was locked up when young Wilbur was born, but now they could see both its doors opened wide. At 1.5 years, Wilbur's size was immense. He spent most of his time at the house tucked away, learning his family's history there and shying away from the harsh light of day. The walls were all lined to the ceiling with shelves, filled with old books for young Wilbur to read. He pored over pictures and charts in the tomes, devouring the knowledge with childlike greed. At 4, Wilbur looked like a lad of 15, and strange sounds were heard from the Whately's top floor. The neighbors all questioned the family, of course, but they were as close-mouthed as ever before. 6 more years passed without too much of note, other than fires on the hill twice a year. Though the whole of the house was remodeled by now, there still lingered an air of intangible fear. Old Whately had noticed more whippoorwills now, and told this to Wilbur while out on a stroll.
"They whistle in tune with my breathing now, boy, and soon will be trying to capture my soul."
On Lammas night of the very next year, Doc Houghton of Aylesbury came to the town. Old Whately was ill in a very grave state, not long for this world, the good doctor soon found. The doctor was thrown by the chatter of birds. A legion of whippoorwills flocked right outside. They cried out in time with the dying man's gasps, uncannily in tune with the old man inside. Old Whately surged up from the bed one last time.
"More space as it grows! It will serve you soon, child. You must find the right book and call open the gates."
Outside, the whippoorwill's cries became wild. The dying man whispered to Wilbur once more,
"Remember to feed it, but don't let it snack. And don't let it out till you open the gates, for great Yog-Sothoth will want to come back."
He fell silent again as he gave into gasps, but an hour dragged on before he finally passed, and the sound of the birds faded soon after that. "Those birds won't get him," said Wilbur at last. Afterwards, Wilbur banned Lavinia from the hill, and for fear of her son, she obeyed from then on. On Halloween night, there were fires once again, then birds at the house, and Lavinia was gone. That winter was when Wilbur first left the town. He'd written to find the Necronomicon on loan, but each place he wrote had refused his request, so he went to the Miskatonic U on his own. Wilbur had his own priceless translation by Dee, that was, though in English, exceedingly rare, but he needed the Latin initially used. This much he told the librarian there. The man, Dr. Armitage, asked what he sought. The great Yog-Sothoth and the spells in his name. Wilbur went on as he copied the text, but these passages seem to be much of the same. Armitage read Wilbur's notes as he wrote, about old ones who lived before man walked the land, of their rituals, signs, and just how they are known, that an odor as foul as their touch was their brand. Thinking of what he had read about Dunwich, Armitage felt some great terrible fear. This dark, goatish giant beside him could be the spawn of some being not meant to be here. At last Wilbur raised up his head to declare his intention to take the book home to peruse. He stopped at the face that old Armitage made, for he knew that the man was about to refuse. "Maybe Harvard won't be quite so fussy, good sir," Wilbur said as he gathered his things up at last. He rose to his feet and he strode out the room, and stooped as he must at each doorway he passed. Armitage heard the dog bark as he left, and thought of the notes he had glanced at as well. He'd read that by foulness you'll know they've been there, and the library reeked of some unholy smell. As he locked the Necronomicon back in its case, he thought of those folks in the valley beyond. What they saw as inbreeding were portents instead, and he wondered just what Wilbur's bloodline had spawned. So he learned what he could in the following weeks, and he spoke to Doc Houghton of Wilbur a lot. He pondered much over the grandfather's words, and of what in that book Wilbur Whately had sought. Those passages held in them terrible clues to an evil design of disastrous scale. As summertime came to an end, he despaired, for terrors now lurked in the Miskatonic Vale. The horror itself came at 4 more years past. The librarian was one of the few to prepare. He heard news from Harvard of Wilbur's trip out, and attempted to acquire the Necronomicon there. Early in August, Doc Armitage woke to the loud, savage barks of the watchdog on ground. Then an unholy scream sounded, waking the school, but no creature of earth could have made such a sound. He raced to the library fast as he could. A window he saw had been smashed open wide. Barking and shrieks could be heard from within, but soon faded to growling and moaning inside. His colleagues, Doc Morgan and Rice, were both there, whom he'd told of his fears, and he led them on site. The building smelled foul with a stench he knew well, and somebody shrieked when he flipped on the light. Wilbur lay in a mess, torn apart by the dog. That some parts were human was clear at the least, but the rest of the man was unworldly and odd, a mass of strange parts never meant for one beast. Their presence had roused him, and Wilbur looked up. With his last dying breath, he then uttered this all. "Nagai naga, bugshaga giga, Yog-Sothoth, Yog-Sothoth." Then he died to a chorus of whippoorwill calls. 2 policemen arrived then to survey the scene, but Morgan delayed them at once in the hall. He warned them to wait for the medical team, to spare them from seeing the creature at all. Meanwhile, strange changes had happened inside, as Rice and old Armitage watched in disgust. The body before them was melting away, leaving behind just a foul whitish crust. Wilbur's strange death warned of what would soon come. From the house in his absence came terrible shouts. As time passed, the sounds grew increasingly loud, till September the 9th, when the horror broke out. On the 10th, Luther Brown rushed to tell what he'd seen, how the old Whately house had been blown all to bits. The trees were knocked down by some unseen dark force, and great footprints were left like deep cavernous pits. The neighbors were shocked by what they had been told, and asked where the terrible footprints had led. "They all lead to the glen," he explained with a wave. "Then we need to get down there," another man said. By noon, more than half of the town had arrived. They went to the wreck that had been Whately's farm. There they found it all covered in strange sticky tar, and the cows were all dead now, they saw with alarm. They observed that the trees by the glen were all bent. It was surely the way that the horror had gone. From below came no sounds but a terrible smell, and not one of the men dared to venture beyond. Folks locked up their doors and they hid all their cows, but at 2 a.m. some dogs woke the Frys. There came from outside a strange swishing sound, and a stench so intense that it burned in their eyes. They heard the loud crack of their barn torn apart, and the horrible screams of their cattle inside. When it quieted down to some crunching and such, Mrs. Fry called her neighbors to share what she'd spied. The next day the town came to see the Frys' farm. 2 swaths of destruction around it were found. One side of the Frys' big red barn was caved in, and huge gaping footprints were stamped in the ground. The townsfolk came up with a number of plans, but too late to mount an effective defense. That night they just boarded their homes up again, and prayed that the thing would be stopped by a fence. In the morning, a group of brave men ventured out. They found the new damage the horror had wrought. They saw that this time the tracks led past the hill where the Whateleys concocted their terrible plot. So the men gathered there at the top of the hill and saw the wide paths where the horror had roamed. On the stones of the hill they found fetid black tar, like what they had found at the Whateleys' smashed home. That night it began like the others before, but at 3 a.m. the telephones rang. "Help! Oh, my God!" yelled the voice on the line, followed by crashing and one final bang. At dawn, they all went to the Frys' family plot. It was covered in tar, and the house was caved in. They found those deep footprints and terrible smells, but the Frys were just gone, as were all of their kin. Meanwhile, old Armitage poured through his notes, from the diary Wilbur's demise left behind. It spoke about Wilbur's unworldly descent, and hinted at secrets inside left to find. Morning found Armitage cold and distressed, as he nervously worked through the diary's text. Morning and night he would search for more clues, and he worried himself over what to do next. By September, both Morgan and Rice intervened. They found him unwell and refusing to stop. The doctor they called him demanded he rest, but still he continued to work till he dropped. Armitage slept, but was ill the next day. In his dreams he could no longer tell what was real. He had nightmare-like visions of beasts from beyond, and then, "Stop them! Oh, stop them!" he'd shout in his zeal. He learned from his texts the right powder to make, to counter the darkness the Whateleys amassed. They couldn't waste time, it could come any day, as it hadn't been fed since young Wilbur had passed. When Armitage finally gained back his health, he called Morgan and Rice to his office to talk. He showed them his notes, and he told them his fears, and even with what they had seen, they were shocked. They chose in the end not to tell the police, and they left late that night with no clear plan in mind. Then Armitage spent the next day on research, in a mad dash to counter whatever they'd find. After 3 or so days to consult Wilbur's notes, they decided next week they would challenge this crime. But a newspaper clip told of Dunwich's ills, and Armitage knew they had run out of time. He called Rice and Morgan to give them the scoop, and they spent the next day making plans up anew. Armitage feared the great terror they faced, but he knew this was something they just had to do. On Friday they drove out to Dunwich at noon. The day was quite bright, but they felt only dread. Hideous happenings darkened their mood, as they pondered what terrors might lurk up ahead. They spoke with the townsfolk about the poor Frys. Sam Hutchins related what happened and when. He told of the smells and the terrible cries, and he swore that he'd never go down there again. They went to the spot that had held the Frys' home, and resolved to keep watch at the cursed ruined site. The townsfolk from Dunwich all thought they were mad, but they left them alone in the end for the night. Armitage pored o'er his notes one more time, and he practiced the spells he had memorized then, while Morgan and Rice checked their tools and their gun, though the weapon would be little use to the men. The morning's first light brought hard rains and dark clouds, so the 3 men from Arkham took cover inside. But as they sat waiting, a group of men came, all running and shouting out loud as they cried. "It's happened again, in the day!" one man yelled. "The phones around town are all calling for you." They'd heard it and smelled it this morning out there. It was down by old Sentinel Hill, last they knew. The posse from Dunwich began to shout out, each man with their own bit of gossip to share. But the one thing they all could agree on was this: Seth Bishop's small farm had been crushed over there. Armitage stopped all their bickering then. He had read Wilbur's notes and he knew what to do. Though the thing on its own was a terrible beast, it had to be stopped or what else might come through. He told them he'd found spells to send it away. Right now it's invisible, hidden from sight. He made up a powder to render it seen, but he needed their help now to find it to fight. Earl Sawyer declared that he knew where it was, and pointed the way to Seth Bishop's wrecked place. They could head across the meadow to reach the right road, and cut the thing off at the hill's sloping base. The group ran out quickly and came to the road, and they found the remains of the crushed Bishop farm. Amidst the great stench they could see the new tracks, and they followed that path with a sense of alarm. They raced past the wreckage of Whately's old house, but they'd hurried along without making a stop. At last they all made it to Sentinel Hill, where the prince marked a trail to the summit up top. They looked through their brass pocket scope at the peak, and watched how the grasses and brush all gave way. It was clear the unseeable thing was now there, and heading to where the old altar stones lay. The 3 men from Arkham gave Curtis the scope. Then they went up to Sentinel Hill all alone. While the Dunwich folks stood and observed from afar, the men stalked the invisible thing by the stone. Curtis watched through the glass as the 3 men went on. "They're ready to make the thing visible there." Some men closed their eyes then, but Curtis still looked, as Rice sprayed the powder at still empty air. The rest of the men saw a huge flash of gray, but Curtis then held up the glass as he peeked. He reeled and moaned, "Oh my God!" and collapsed, and the other men listened in fear as he shrieked. "Bigger'n a barn, and all made up of ropes!" Curtis gasped as he shook past all rational thought. "With dozens of legs and big eyes and wide mouths, and a terrible half of a face up on top." Earl Sawyer now took up the scope and he watched, while the 3 men from Arkham went on with their work. They shouted their chants and they waved all around, as they sought to dispel the dark presence that lurked. All of a sudden the sky went pitch black. Thunder rumbled and lightning bolts flashed overhead. The chant from the 3 men from Arkham grew loud, and above the clouds flashed at the words they had said. Without warning, a voice rang through the dark empty sky, and the sounds coming out were a harsh croaking yell. "Yignal! Yignal! Thifkling la! Yagsatheth! Yibthunk! Yehir! Ngurglug!" On top of the hill the men finished their chant, and the terrible unseen dark thing at last coughed. "Yaha! Naga! Hyah! Help me, father! Oh, help, Yog-Sothoth!" Then a lone bolt of lightning shot down to the stones. Wind whipped all around, and the stench roiled past. The grass and the greenery died at their feet, and then it was done. It was over at last. When the horror dispersed, the sun came out again. The Arkham men made their way down from the hill. Their faces were quiet and grave as they walked, but they'd finished the task they had come to fulfill. "It's gone now forever," old Armitage said. "Its makeup was much like its father's had been. It's outside the reach of material realms, and it cannot exist here forever again." After a moment of silence had passed, poor Curtis asked after the horror's half-face. It had looked like a Whately, but how could that be, when that thing must have been of some unearthly race? Armitage answered as clear as he could about what the Whateleys had brought to this plane. It went against nature and all common sense to summon those things that would be mankind's bane. The Whateleys were raising the thing as a tool to bring Yog-Sothoth here, he explained to the men. It grew up like Wilbur, for it was his twin, but was more like his father than Wilbur had been. The end. So there you go, guys. That is Littlest Lovecraft Presents the Dunwich Horror. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope it got you interested in not only the Dunwich Horror by H.P. Lovecraft, but maybe by other things written by Lovecraft. If you want to check out my previous video of the reading of this wonderful book here, The Call of Cthulhu, I'll have a link in the description to my video of that. Call of Cthulhu is easily my favorite story by Lovecraft. It's the first one I ever read by him and the one that made me fall in love with his crazy horror stories and stuff like that. So I highly recommend at least checking out my video of this book to see if it might interest you as well. So let's talk about the little surprise I have for you guys. It just so happens I have an extra copy of Littlest Lovecraft Presents The Call of Cthulhu. You can see where this is going? So all you need to do if you want this extra copy is like this video and then like the Cthulhu 2 Facebook page. I've had it around for a while, haven't really used it a ton because there hasn't been a lot of interest in it, but I want you guys to go like that Facebook page. We'll start talking about Littlest Lovecraft stuff. So while you're there, leave a comment saying like what name you go by on YouTube, so I can like recognize who's liking and who's entering for the book and everything. And then after, I'll say a week, as of this video going up, I will choose one of those people that liked and commented on the Facebook page, and I will get in contact with them and send them this wonderful book. I think you guys will really like it. It's really cool. Obviously, I'm going to have links in the description as well to things that the EO and Tro have worked on, in case you want to check them out and try to catch up with them on the next Kickstarter, because they have teased the next Kickstarter. I assume it's going to be another Littlest Lovecraft book, because it's what they are great at. So check out all those different links in the description. Like I mentioned, my video of the reading of The Call of Cthulhu, the Facebook page for my YouTube channel, Cthulhu 2, and then stuff about EO and Tro and their Kickstarters. They have a website as well, and the cool stuff they're working on. So the description is your friend for this video. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the reading, my goofy voicing for things and stuff like that. Hopefully you enjoyed. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you guys again next time.